There are rumors in the Kremlin, one more incredible than the other. Everyone is wondering, why did Putin cancel his public appearances at the end of the year? He will not hold a big press conference, nor a direct call line with the people, nor a speech with a message before the Federal Assembly. What happened? Is he upset by the course of the war? Or is he so afraid of getting infected that he will go into the bunker of a while, as the British press writes? Or is there some other reason? And if there is, what is there? I'm Oleksii Matsuka, and together we will find all the answers. You may think this is a trifle, but in fact the signal is very serious. After all, Putin has been holding a big final press conference for almost 2 decades. Since 2001. It was not only when he was Prime Minister of Russia, when Medvedev was the president, and so direct lines were annual. The press conferences following the results of the year were considered the same Kremlin ritual. And to deliver a message to the deputies is not just a tradition, the law obliges. The Kremlin used these 3 big events to the fullest, both to influence public opinion within the country itself and to send signals to enemies and adversaries. American diplomats even told me that the largest Western analytical structures did not even let their employees go for the Christmas holidays to analyze the messages from Moscow. And now all this has been cancelled and without any clear explanation. At the same time, they cancelled both the New Year's reception and the traditional meeting with business. And the impression was that Putin was hiding from most public meetings. But why? As usual in such cases, versions with references to anonymous sources fell from different sides. The most detailed version was offered by the Moscow Times. Referring to people close to the Kremlin, it reports that the final conference was still being prepared, but Putin himself decided to cancel it at the last minute. There is logic in this. Whatever one may say, but the main topic of the press conference will be war. And discussing it, considering both the situation at the front and the strikes deep into Russia itself, is somewhere embarrassing. The surrender of Kherson, and Putin has not yet commented on it. The attack on the naval bases in Sevastopol, strikes on military airfields in the Saratov and Ryazan regions left the Kremlin without good news.
In particular, there were worries in the Kremlin that Kiev might be able to stage a major attack in the run-up to the event. No one could give a 100% guarantee that such an attack wouldn't take place, one Kremlin official told the Moscow Times on condition of anonymity. The president was aware of this, and it was a strong argument against holding the press conference. From the Moscow Times publication.
It's also quite clear that the Russian leader, in principle, doesn't have answers to many questions that are likely to be raised at a press conference.
What to talk about? There are more questions and fewer answers. Moreover, the participants in the decision-making process themselves ask these questions. From the Moscow Times publication.
But as for Putin's message to the Federal Assembly, there is also no complete understanding here, but a formal justification has appeared. Независимая газета published an editorial, "Do I need a message from the president right now?" It just states that this is a programmatic speech and the situation is constantly changing. The conclusion of the Независимая газета is that rituals will return when predictability returns. Well, about Putin's big conversation with the society, the Kremlin's propaganda 10 books were released in the media which provide a set of excuses. It's recommended to mention the focus on the so-called special military operation and its consequences. Reassure people that everything is going according to plan, and when Russia achieves certain success, there will be a report. But this, as everyone understands, is just an attempt to make a good face with a bad game, but in fact, what happened? The Western press is sure that the whole thing is Putin's fear for his health. A number of British newspapers almost on the same day, and this suggests that the information was shared with them somewhere in official structures, wrote about an outbreak of flu in Putin's team. Like, because of this, he can close in one of his bunkers. Wait out, sit out, worrying about his safety. There is a second assumption that they say that information about the flu from Moscow is leaked on purpose. But in fact, this is a prologue to the long isolation of the president of Russia. COVID restrictions were once used for this, and in Moscow they may think that the story of the flu will be calmly accepted by society. The cancellation of Putin's landmark speeches and public appearances against this background could look natural, and thus it will be possible not to give interviews, not to speak, not to comment. Don't show both the country and the world what a strategic debt, and Putin found himself in the 10th month of the war. And this is indeed so. The publicly declared goals of the war have changed several times over this month, from denazification, demilitarization, the capture of Kiev in 3 days, the liberation of Donbass, to the acquisition of new territories and the Azov Inland Sea. All this did not happen, and now it seems that what is called a special operation in Russia, the Kremlin wants to transform into a people's war, with a complete transition of the entire system to military footing. And for this, we really need an informational pause, and also an excuse why there are no negotiations, the need for which Moscow constantly declared.
The President Putin likes to talk more about the very process of the war and its intermediate results, the acquisition of new territories. The war for the president has turned into something like a computer game. The player has no special goals. The pass itself is valuable for him. Starting the war, Putin got a taste and therefore is unlikely to sit down at the negotiation table in the near future. Andrei Pertsev, journalist, special correspondent for Meduza.
They also say that against the backdrop of military defeats, Putin is even more closed off from the outside world from external information and any alternative opinion, even if journalists admitted to the body, express it in a mild form, is extremely uncomfortable and even painful for him.
Direct lines and press conferences still gave the chance that 1 or 2 votes would give the President Putin that unwanted contact with external reality. This contact with the outside, which can destroy some, let's call it, okay, not illusions, but starting points. For example, regarding popular unity and support for any of his actions, is now highly undesirable. Ekaterina Vinogradova, Russian journalist.
The cancellation of public speaking may also be a prologue to the country's transition to a besieged forces regime before the first success of victories that Moscow still hopes for. This has happened in many countries. Autocratic rulers always position themselves as people of success. Putin did the same, associating exclusively with success and victories, both Russia and himself.
Dictators cannot be unsuccessful. They stay in power by implanting in people's brains the idea that it is only thanks to them that peace is preserved here. In general, they live, give birth, exist only thanks to dictators. They need to associate themselves with success. And what are the successes in Ukraine? Continuous military defeats. Alexander Podrobinek, human rights activist.
The second assumption that has now appeared in the US is the loss of control over the informational agenda. The American Institute for the Study of War believes that the cancellation of the Putin's public addresses is due to the fact that the Kremlin is no longer confident that it can continue to shape and manage public opinion inside Russia. Criticism of the war is growing, dissatisfaction with mobilization, fatigue from military topics.
Russian President Vladimir Putin's alluded decision to postpone his annual address to the Russian Federation Assembly indicates he remains uncertain of his ability to shape the Russian information space amidst increasing criticism of his conduct of the invasion of Ukraine. Putin may not be confident in his ability to justify the cost of his war upon Russian domestic and global affairs when addressing the Russian public and elites. From a report by the Institute for the Study of War.
Forming public opinion is an important task both for Putin and for Russian government as well. But problems have recently appeared regarding this. Increasingly, there are opinions that Kyiv forced Russia to change its agenda, at least the informational one. And the strategic initiative in the war is in the hands of Ukraine, experts are sure.
I think there are two aspects here. On the one hand, the topic of war is such that discussing other topics is bad and inappropriate. It is hard to imagine how one can talk only about the war for 2 or 3 hours. If you look at the recent speeches of the Russian president, it can be noted that he may not have that energy anymore, and he would not have lasted 3 hours. He has no optimism, no vision for the future, and is no longer able to positively charge his citizens. Rainer Sachs, security expert.
The press conferences and direct lines of recent years really show that the Russian authorities are getting worse and worse at showing the people the positive. Therefore, they began to annoy Putin. After all, it was essentially a battle between an artificial positive agenda and the natural, accumulated discontent of people.
In the absence of political competition, unfortunately, now in Russia there is a very tough authoritarian, or as they say, totalitarian regime. This is probably just a tool from the past, which perhaps was needed as such a baby monitor. Everything is calm, I'm again telling you the same thing, you again laugh at my very witty jokes about the grandmother's genitals and so on. It doesn't provide anything particularly new. Oleg Stepanov, Russian opposition politician.
And the very format of open communication in Russia's case, pseudo-open, with the people is also something foreign from Western democracy, and in Russia now they're trying to disown everything foreign. And although this kind of prolonged communication has become a kind of Putin's brand, the real situation imposes, so to speak, sanctions on this creation of his.
It was one of the brands of Vladimir Putin, and it was definitely a powerful event. The Russian president always handled it very well, answering journalists' questions at a fast pace. Live for 3 or 4 hours is still a rally that not everyone will dare to take. Rainer Sachs, security expert.
But the war activated a new time frame. Take, for example, the same President Zelensky who speaks every day at the end of the day, and if important events require it, then it right after them. And here the Kremlin tried to cling to the format when all the most important things are discussed only once a year.
In March, big people said that it is not worth planning anything for more than one day. In September, after mobilization, they corrected their advice and now do not plan for more than half a day. Therefore, Putin can update the text of the message at night based on the results of the past day, but no one will give a guarantee that by noon, when he comes out to read it, it will not become outdated. And cancelling and postponing a message is even worse than announcing it. Kirill Shulika, Russian blogger and journalist.
All these assumptions and arguments are quite logical. It's just that having been carried away by the discussion creating a new warm bath for Putin, Moscow apparently does not see that the fact that the authorities could not find some optimal format for communication with the people could significantly affect the stability of the regime. After all, if the authorities evade communication with the people, then the people can begin to speak for themselves. Well, how long this political quarantine or theatre pause will last, I will definitely tell you in one of the new videos. Don't miss the latest releases 3 times a week on this channel, and thank you for watching.